Okay? So the people who are buried tend to be the ones who are disabled. They have some form of disease, which makes us think that maybe they're shamans. Okay? They were picked to be shamans because hunter-gatherers thought you're different, therefore you must be special. Therefore, the mother goddess favors you. Okay? And high levels of care until the time of death. Sometimes their funerals were remarkably lavish, which meant that they were prioritized by the community. They were highly valued by the people around them, okay? The best explanation is, well, they were shamans. They were people who could access the spirit world and communicate with it, okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right. Any questions before I move on? All right. Now, another amazing thing that we found about Ice Age cave paintings is that they have symbols, okay? So we saw pictures, but a Canadian anthropologist named Genevieve von Petzinger, she went all around the world and she documented symbols in these Ice Age cave paintings, and she found recurring symbols. For example, the hand, okay? The hand is everywhere. The spiral, the quadrangle, the circle, okay? The asterisks. Let me ask you this question. Why would paintings have symbols? Why would drawings have symbols? Why can't you just draw the thing? Why do you need to have symbols? Okay, so you're right, okay? So we think that this is a written language, okay? It's one of the first written languages, which meant that back then, they actually had the ability to read and write, okay? So maybe this is a common language. What are some other possibilities? Why would you want to use symbols in a painting? Excuse me? To keep the content mysterious. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, to keep the content mysterious. And so where do these symbols come from? To keep the content mysterious, right? You have these symbols and their secret signs. Where are the secret signs from? I know, but where do they believe they got the signs from? Okay, do you understand? Okay, so another theory, okay, again, we don't know, okay, no one knows, but like let's look at different theories. Another theory is that this is the language of the gods, right? As you say, to keep the content mysterious, to give it divine or holy or sacred meaning. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. What are some other possibilities?
Or maybe they just have to save time. Because I don't know, like drawing a symbol can save time, but like rather than drawing a whole bunch of pictures.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So this can also be a shorthand. Okay, we call this shorthand. But also, like, there's some things you can't draw. For example, love, or energy, or repetition, or balance, harmony, cycle, right? These things you can't draw. So you have to represent them using symbols, okay? So there are many different possibilities, which means this, okay? Let's just summarize what the possibilities are. What are the symbols in art, okay? The first is that maybe you're trying to visualize an idea, okay? You can't draw energy or life force or cycle repetition, so you just have to use a symbol to represent it, okay? Which means what? Which means that each picture is a mythology. It's a story, okay? Do you understand? The pictures aren't trying to show you a picture, they're trying to tell you a story about the world. And that's why symbols are important. Because in a story, there are ideas that you cannot visually express. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? That's the first thing. Second thing is that you're trying to visualize the language of the spirit world. Okay? So this goes back to making the concept mysterious. Okay, why do we think this? The answer is this. Okay, we think that when they drew, the way to access the spirit world is to use drugs, okay, what we'll call psychedelics. So, in other words, there are certain plants that if you drink, okay, it makes you see things. And the things they see are, in fact, the symbols, the geometric signs. So in other words, they went to the spirit world, or they think they went into the spirit world, and then they're just trying to express the language of the spirit world, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so this is a complicated idea, okay? But I want to introduce this idea to you, like how we perceive or how we understand reality. So for most of human history, we thought that, oh, reality was just reality. And we are just trying to see reality, okay? Reality is something that you must see. And then along came a philosopher. And he's a very famous philosopher. I want you to remember the name. But his name is Immanuel Kant. Okay? And he is considered the greatest philosopher who ever lived, Immanuel Kant, German. And his idea is this. His idea is that reality is not something that we experience or we see. Reality is something that we imagine, that we create with our mind. An example he uses is time and space. Okay? The idea of time, like 1, 2, 3, 4, it does not exist in nature. It doesn't exist, okay? It's something that our minds made up. So our reality is something that we imagine every day. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, what's really interesting is that Immanuel Kant was writing maybe over 200 years ago, okay? And today we have a new science called neuroscience. Okay? Neuroscience is the study of the brain. And what's really amazing, okay, and we will discuss this in future classes, is that neuroscience has confirmed Immanuel Kant, meaning that we now know that the brain imagines reality, okay? It projects reality. Does that make sense? So what drugs do is they change the structure of your brain so that you see a different reality. Okay, does that make sense, guys? So that's what drugs do. And so when they see a different reality, maybe they're seeing symbols, okay? So that's the second thing about symbols in art. Now, the last thing is these symbols are mysterious, right? And mystery makes things sacred and divine, right? So back to childbirth. Childbirth is something that back then they couldn't understand. Therefore, they have to believe that childbirth is sacred and divine, and therefore, women are sacred and divine. Because only women are able to give birth. Men are allowed to give birth. Okay? So back then, we believed that for most of human history, either we were egalitarian, meaning like men and women were equal, or women had more power than men. Only in recent history do men have more power, okay? And how this happened, I'll explain to you next week, okay? But just remember, like back then, there was no separation of sexes. If anything, women were considered superior to men. Remember, like the god is a mother goddess, a female. And therefore, women are more special than men, and they know this because women give birth, not men, okay? And childbirth is mysterious. Does that make sense? Okay, so we understand symbols in art as doing these three things. Now we have a more comprehensive or complete understanding of why they did art, okay? The first reason is what they're trying to do is they're trying to visualize their mythology. Okay? They're trying to take this idea, their understanding of how the world works, their religion, and they're trying to visualize it, okay? So art is basically religion. There's no difference. Second thing is that they're trying to show to themselves how reality works, okay? They're trying to show that the underlying reality is the soul or God, okay? Does that make sense? Now, the last thing, which is the most important, is they're trying to create a common memory and imagination, a language, a mythology that they all share together, okay? And this is what we call society. Does that make sense? So in other words, okay, the argument I'm trying to make to you today is, one, religion has always been there since the dawn of humanity. Okay, that's the first. Second thing is that religion allows us to communicate with each other, to be together in society. So the third thing is religion is what allows us to be fundamentally human. Without religion, we could not be human. We could not think. We could not communicate. We could not imagine. Does it make sense, guys? Okay, any questions about this? Okay, now let's look at a quote. Okay, what is religion? Okay, and this is from Emile Durkheim. Okay, and I want you to remember the name Emile Durkheim. Okay, he's just as famous as Immanuel Kant. Emile Durkheim is considered the founder of sociology. Okay, so when you go to university and you study sociology, guess what? You'll mainly be studying Emile Durkheim. Okay, so this is what he says about religion. Religion is above all, okay, first and foremost, religion is this: a system of ideas by which men imagine society of which they are members, okay? It's to create society and the obscure yet intimate relations they have with it, okay? Religion is a way for them to understand the world. All right? Does that make sense, guys? All right. So let's look at what he says again in more detail. Okay, so the great service that religions have rendered to thought is to have constructed a first representation of what the relations of kinship between things might be. Okay? So what this is saying is that religion allows us to construct an understanding of the world. Okay? So basically the first religion was this, right? And this is just a theory of the world. And this is important because from this theory, we are able to construct more theories. All right. Given the conditions in which it was tried, that enterprise could obviously lead only to makeshift results. Okay? Meaning that, okay, well, listen, religion, it's all about guessing. It's all about hypothesizing, okay? So, a lot of these ideas aren't going to work out. That doesn't matter. But then, are the results of any such enterprise ever definitive, and must it not be taken up again and again, okay? So our desire to know, our curiosity, forces us to constantly reimagine our religion. Furthermore, it was less important to succeed than to dare. The fact that we try is what's important. What was essential was not to let the mind be dominated by what appears to the senses, okay? But instead to teach the mind to dominate it and to join together what the senses put asunder. So, as human beings, we're not trying to see the world, we're trying to imagine the world. Okay? That's what makes us human. Okay? Going back to Immanuel Kant, our ability to imagine reality is what makes us fundamentally human. As soon as man became aware that internal connections exist between things, science and philosophy became possible. So from religion, we developed philosophy and science. In fact, you can say that science today is our religion. Okay? There's really no difference. It's just an understanding of the world based on our imagination and some evidence. Religion made a way for them. It is because religion is a social thing that it could play this role. To make men take control of sense impressions and replace them with a new way of imagining the real, a new kind of thought had to be created. Collective thought, okay? So religion is our collective consciousness. It's what allows society to come into being. If collective thought alone had the power to achieve this, here is the reason. Creating a whole world of ideals through which the world of sense realities seem transfigured would require a hyper-excitation of intellectual forces that is only possible in and through society, okay? It's only because we are together are we inspired to come up with religion. So religion is fundamental to being human. Without religion, there could be no society. Without society, there could also be no religion. Okay? Do you understand? So the implication of all this is that as a human, first of all, you are not alone. If you're alone, you're not a human. You're a human because you live in society. You're with other people. And because you're with other people, you must have a collective consciousness or an idea you share together, and we call this thing religion. Okay? Does that make sense? This is clear to you guys? All right. Any questions? Anything you are not clear about? Do you see how all this connects together? Okay? The cave paintings is what started it. Cave paintings is the expression of a religion. Then when the Ice Age ended, we had the chance to settle down, we created communities to celebrate our religion. And that's what gave rise to agriculture. Okay? And the religion that we use is probably something like this. Okay? The world is interconnected. There's a mother goddess that gives light to everything. Okay? Any questions? Anything you're unclear about? Yeah?
Back then, well, is there like only one God, or is there like lots of different gods for different like careers? Like because now we have different gods for everything.
Okay, so that's a great question, okay? So the question is monotheism, okay? So the three major religions of today, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, okay? They're all monotheistic, meaning they believe in one God. So this is actually a very recent innovation, okay? So back then, they wouldn't have a concept of power hierarchy. Do you understand? They wouldn't think that the mother goddess is the greatest god of all. They could only think like the stars, right? There's no hierarchy in the stars. They're all over the place. Okay? So maybe the mother goddess gives birth to our world, but maybe there's another god that gives birth to another world, okay? So they wouldn't think in terms of hierarchy. We think in terms of hierarchy today because of monotheism. But back then, they wouldn't think so. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So maybe today you can think of a pyramid, okay? There's people at the top. But back then, they would think like it's a river. Okay? We're all part of the river. It's a cycle. It just goes in circles. And there's no differentiation or there's no power hierarchy. Things go wrong when there's conflict inside this river, okay? When people don't do things they're supposed to be doing. Okay? So, and these things are what? What are things that defy the mother goddess or go against the mother goddess? How about incest, right? How about killing animals without making the proper sacrifices? Right? So you just kill the animals, but you don't go in the cave to pray for them for their return. Okay? So in other words, in this world, religion is basically ritual. And this is something that we'll study next class, how religion is just ritual. Okay? Just habits and practices and actions. Any more questions? That's a great question, by the way. But monotheism is something that we will look at very closely in future classes. And it's very important because it's a basis for our society, okay? Any other questions? Yeah?
You mentioned last class that we transformed to agriculture because of religion.
Yes.
But if a cave, you can also pray in a cave and it also serves the function of rituals, then why is it necessary to transform to agriculture?
But you can't live in a cave, though. Right? You can't live in a cave. You can only go there now and then. There's no oxygen in a cave. It's too dark. It's too cold. You can't live there. Right? So you're right in that, okay, if a cave were livable, they could build farms around that cave. Okay? So, okay, that's actually a great question, okay? Besides caves, what are some other portals in the world? What are some other portals into the world that have like spiritual energy besides caves? In nature. If you were back then, you would think that this place is special because it both connects our world and spirit world. And these places would be mountaintops, right? Mountaintops. Guess what? Göbekli Tepe was on a mountaintop, okay? Where else would there be portals? Rivers, okay? Rivers. Does it make sense? These are places that people would think are portals into another world, and therefore they are special. And we find that when they settled down and built agriculture, they did so on mountaintops and they did so around rivers. Okay? Does that make sense? But not caves, because you couldn't actually live in caves. Okay? Does that answer your question? You can't live in a cave. There's no food, and it's cold, and it's wet. Great question, okay? Yeah, so they lived outside in tents. No, you can't live in a cave. There's no oxygen. Okay? Any more questions? Okay, so your question actually makes me think of a point I want to end the class with, okay? So today we think that we are either economic animals or biological animals. Okay, so the person who introduced us, who introduced to us the idea that we are economic animals is Karl Marx. Okay, and his argument is that we are driven by our need to have money. Okay, and that's what we believe today, right? You're in school because you want to get good grades, so you can go get into a good university, and then you can go get a good job. Okay. Now, there are other people who believe that we are biological animals. And these are people are called evolutionary biologists. And they are inspired by Charles Darwin. So the idea here is that we are motivated by our desire to spread our genes, okay? So if I'm a man, I want to sleep with as many women as possible. Because if I sleep with as many women as possible, I spread my genes, right? But if you're a woman, you want to find a man who will be loyal to you, because the cost of child rearing is very high. Okay? Does it make sense? So, and we'll be discussing both these theories more throughout the semester. Okay? The argument I want to make to you today is that no, we are first and foremost a religious animal. We have the fundamental need to understand why we are here. We have a fundamental need to connect with everyone, okay? To connect with other people. But that does not mean that we are not economic and biological animals, okay? They all interplay together. Do you understand? So what we'll see later in the semester is that you might have a religion, but this religion is not meeting your economic and biological needs, then you have to either abandon the religion or change the religion, okay? But we'll also know that the economic need is not enough. You also need religion. So there is an interplay between economics, biology, and religion. Okay? And that's what drives human history. This is something that we will learn more about next week, okay? Sorry, next week. Okay? So, yeah, any more questions?